Okay, so good morning, everybody. I'm sure there'll still be a couple of folks trickling in here, and I'm going to ask my team member, Kathy, to keep an eye on that and continue letting people in as they arrive. But in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and get started with all of my housekeeping notes and introduction. So again, good morning. Hello. Thank you for being here today from wherever you are. My name is Catherine Calhoun Cutshaw. I am the manager of Buncombe County Special Collections, formerly the North Carolina Room. Buncombe County Special Collections is Buncombe County in Western North Carolina archival repository. There are many others around, but Buncombe County Special Collections is, I think, ultra special because it's in a public library, and not many archives and historic repositories are. So I think that that's a really awesome thing about us and a resource that you all as Buncombe Countyans and Western North Carolinians can take advantage of at any time. You don't even have to have a library card because things don't circulate down here. We wish you would, and we'll be happy to make you one, but don't let that get in the way of coming to visit us in Special Collections. Which you now can do. So starting this week, we are matching Pack Memorial Library's hours. You don't have to make an appointment. So just like old times, if Pack Memorial Library is open, you can visit Special Collections and just walk right in, and we'll be happy to help with whatever you're doing or leave you alone to browse and just explore the collection. So this program and many other programs like it are supported by our Friends of Special Collections. The Friends of Special Collections are an auxiliary fundraising group that help us do all these wonderful extras. If it weren't for those folks, we wouldn't have the money to pay folks like Wayne to come and do these wonderful programs and compensate folks for their time and their mental energy and their expertise. So you too can be a friend of Buncombe County Special Collections. It's a $15 annual membership fee. And right now, the best way to do that is to mail a check to 67 Haywood Street, made out to Friends of Special Collections. And we're working on some more electronic means of fundraising as well. But right now, in true archival historic form, we are accepting checks. So if you feel so led and you enjoy this program today, you can thank the Friends of Special Collections by helping put on more programs like this in the future. So without further ado, again, thank you all so much for being here this morning. I'm really excited to welcome Wayne Caldwell, a Buncombe County native and an author and writer, and all-around great guy. I'm a big fan of his two previous novels, Catalucci and Requiem by Fire. And today he's here to talk to us about the poetry of place and his newest publication, Woodsmoke, a book of poetry. So Wayne, take it away.
Thank you, Catherine. Can everybody hear me and see me?
Yes.
I just have to tell you that I am not really good at this technology business. And if I make a mistake, please forgive me. And I also want to echo what Catherine was saying about the Friends of the Special Collections. $15 is really cheap to have all the resources at your fingertips that this Special Collections means. I've used these for years, and if you're not a member, you need to be. So there's a little plug for that. Okay, Catherine, I'm trying to make the slideshow come up, and I'm not being real good about it.
Sure. So just move your cursor down to share screen.
Yeah.
When you select that, pick the one that's got us pulled up in it.
Oh, I got you.
There we are.
No?
Perfect.
Okay. Can everybody see that? Okay. I want to start by saying that I want to thank you for being here. There's all kinds of things you could be doing besides listening to an old guy talk about poetry. But it's where I am, it's kind of cold. It's dogwood winter, I expect. It's rainy, it's windy, it's 44 degrees, and I just don't care for that very much. But anyway, it's a good place to be here in a library, if it's virtual, even if it's virtual. Let me get a feel for who's here. I know some of you just by but some of you I don't. So if you want to tell us a little bit about yourselves, that would be very nice. Who wants to start?
Well, I'll start. My name's Tom McLeod. I'm from Miami, Florida. I'm retired and interested in reading and actually write a little bit of poetry myself.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tom.
Sure.
Okay, I'll talk. I'm Mary Ellen Brown. I'm here in Nashville. I'm also a poet and write about place. And I've read your novels, and I thought, wow, I hadn't realized that you wrote poetry also. So I'm really excited about listening to your ideas about poetry and place.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mary Ellen.
And I'm Kathleen Calby, and I'm down the road in Hendersonville, North Carolina. So this is great. When I saw this come up, I thought, what a great opportunity. I also write poetry and write a lot about nature. I'm not familiar with your work, but I'm excited to learn more. So I'm here.
Okay, thanks, Kathleen. I think I saw my old friend Peggy Gardner's name on this. Peggy, are you here? I guess Peggy's muted. She and I go
don't
way
think
back.
Peggy has the ability to speak. We're working on that, but
Oh,
I'm sure she
okay.
says hello. She's
A
waving.
long time ago, back in 1980 and 81, the city of Asheville had this weird idea that they were going to put a downtown mall in the middle of the city and get rid of about 85 historic buildings and all of that. And Peggy and I were kind of instrumental in the fight against that. So Peggy, every time I see you, I want to hug you and thank you for that. I think I also saw one of my kinfolk in here, Stella Taylor.
Yeah, I'm here primarily as an admirer of your work and as family and as a representative for my granddaughter, Julia, who lives up in Chicago and is attending high school this morning, 9th grade, and is a budding writer that Wayne is supporting. So she'll be very excited to see this program.
Okay, thank you, Stella. Stella's what I learned, a term I learned this week in another book. She's wife kin. She's my wife's cousin, so glad you're here.
That's a good one. Thank you.
Anybody else want to talk? Okay. Well, I'm afraid there's a lot of buildup here that I'm not going to be able to come up to. If you're looking for me to say a single original thing, I'm probably not going to do it. Because, I mean, what can you say about something as broad as poetry? I'm not going to make any of you an accomplished poet either, but I think that we can do some good things together. And I want you actually to do a little bit of writing today, and we want to jump into that in a little while. But first, I want to just talk a little bit. How did a novelist get to be a poet? I guess is a question that some of you would ask, and I'm just going to say that I have written poetry all my life. It's just that I haven't published any, and the stuff that I was writing in high school and college and like that, I hope has been destroyed and totally forgotten because it was just nothing anybody would want to keep around. But probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was working on a long novel. And the way I tell it is that this old fellow just sort of walked into my mind and started talking to me mostly about firewood. And I was at first kind of irritated about that because I was trying to focus on this novel, and but he wouldn't shut up. And so I started listening to him and finally started writing some of these things down. He had a particularly interesting voice, and one that I learned to listen to. Actually, probably what happened was that I was kind of stuck in the novel and I needed somewhere to go. And Posey, I came to learn that this fellow's name was Posey Green. He was in his mid-80s. He had lived in one particular place all his life without any neighbors. And I discovered that he had gotten a neighbor that he didn't particularly want, but she was a woman in her mid-50s who was a poet, and they got to become friends. And that's what little bit of plot there is in Woodsmoke is that's it. But place. We're here to talk about the poetry of place. But first, I want to say something about what poetry can do. I don't like that kind of thought. Poetry is not supposed to do anything, right? I mean, I have a son who's an engineer. He went to North Carolina State. And he tells his children, my grandchildren, that people who go to Carolina just sit around under trees and write poems all day. And people who go to state become engineers and things like that and have good jobs. And, you know, that's the mythology that he has with that. But that poetry does have some functions. Horace, a long time ago, said that the two aims of poetry are to delight and to instruct. And I would probably add one more thing to that, which is poetry can also amuse. And when I think of things like that, I'm thinking of Ogden Nash, for example, whose verse was printed in the New Yorker for years and years and years. Never did make a whole lot of sense, but it was just something that is to me fascinatingly amusing. And of course, muse is the root of amuse, and then we get into all kinds of poetic things with that. Poetry is an ever-present help, I've found over my life. In times of trouble and times of joy, it can just help a lot of things. It's an anchor, in short. And it can help us in meditation, it can help us in prayer, it can help us in grief. And I'm thinking in grief, things like, I don't know if you're a Bruce Springsteen fan, but his recent album called Letter to You has 2 songs on it that are really poems. 1 Minute You're Here. And of course, the following line is next minute you're gone. And how to deal with that kind of feeling. And then the last track on that is I'll see you in my dreams. And that takes not a place so much as an object that used to belong to somebody who's gone. And then there's a little meditation on that. So, you know, that kind of thing can really help you. Poetry also, I think, helps make sense of our world, where we are, what we keep. Poets are pack rats, you know. We don't ever throw anything away. And because we think maybe one of these days it will come in handy. That's why poets normally keep journals. I don't know if you do or not, but if you don't, you should, because there are ideas there that some of these days you might be able to use something like that. Poetry is good also in talking about things like local history and family history and stuff like that, that you can make old stories come alive by talking about the place in which this happened. I do that a good deal, Woodsmoke. And then poetry just I don't know. It's something that brings a little beauty into your life. I'm going to read a line or two here from Neighbor, one of the poems in Woodsmoke. This is Posy and Susan first meeting and talking to one another. He finds out she's a writer. He says, well, Susan, what do you write? She says, poems. He says, what kind? Mostly short poems. I like to experiment with forms. Make any money off of them? She laughed. Of course not. Well, then why? Beauty, Posy. The world needs it. So that's a little reflection out of Woodsmoke on the why of poetry. Now, what about place? Place can be any number of things. It can be geography, it can be nature, it can be people, it can be a community. And it can go from a community to a house, to a room, to a piece of furniture, which might be a cabinet, which might have a cookbook in it. And you see what I'm doing there. You're coming down from a far place to a near place in a very concrete place. And maybe that's your mother's cookbook, and maybe there's a recipe in there that she used to make those sugar cookies, and I haven't thought of those in 100 years. And here's the kernel of a poem. That's a place that's going to be a good warm and fuzzy place for you, maybe. They don't have to be warm and fuzzy. They can be threatening. They can be fragile. They can be hostile. They can be quiet. There's all sorts of ways that places can be depicted. I'm going to go with these sugar cookies here for the time being on this one, but there might be some real traumatic thing that you've never worked through, and you need to do that. And it's a lot, writing poetry is a lot cheaper than paying a therapist. I'll tell you that right now. So yeah. By the way, I don't think I've ever gotten up and said, you know, today I think I'll write a poem. That's just not something I do. If I'm working on a novel, yeah, I get up and I say, I'm going to get through that chapter today, or I'm going to finish this scene or whatever. But poems just sort of occur to you. I was thinking about one of them out of Woodsmoke. It's called Katie Did. I'll just read a little bit of that to you here. Fall of the year shows first in a red sourwood leaf, crimson on the creeper, then yellow sassafras, red and gold maples, dogwood berries bright. That's all powerful, pretty, and right. But I see fall coming, not with eyes, but ears. When out from under summer's jarfly chorus, I hear, Katie did, 6 more weeks, frost will come, frost will come. That fool insect might as well say, rick the hay, fat the hog, cut the wood, pick the fruit, never stop, never stop. Long ago, one snuck into the bedroom. I blew out the light, was about asleep when that booger went off a foot from my head. Bertie, my wife, fussed at me for killing it, but there's limits. A man can only stand so much reminding. And as you can imagine, that came from me getting waked up by Katie Did one night, making a little entry in my journal about that. And then maybe probably 10, 12 years later, here comes the story that's part of that poem. So it doesn't have to, place doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a Katie Did, or it can be a big thing. I'm thinking Carl Sandburg's Chicago poems, you know, a long piece of geography. And that gets me kind of into, let's see here. That gets me into Woodsmoke. And if you can see the cover art for this book, published by Blair in Durham, and they know what they're doing. It's they really have good folks there. I just want to thank them as I'm doing it. The first poem in Woodsmoke is a place poem. It's called Pisgah. And I'm going to read that to you, and I want you to make notes as I'm reading. I hope things will occur to you that will kind of create a frame for you to hang some words on here in a few minutes. And those of you who are in Florida and who may not be natives might not know Mount Pisgah, but I've lived very close to Mount Pisgah for a lot of my life. And so has Posey. First stanza. I've always lived in sight of Pisgah's crown, 10 or 12 crowback miles from Pole Creek, the peak a steadfast anchor for my soul. There's that anchor again, by the way. Twixt here and there, green folds of South Homony's story feel like old friends shadowed by the mountain. It's stout, worthy, tall by more than a mile. The rock face halfway up they call the bride and groom, who after deep snow look pleased as punch to marry. 2 peaks to its left, a rat sneaks up the ridge. A rub-lamped genie could conjure up no better sight to greet an old man's eyes at one more weary dawn. And I just realized I should have brought up this slide here while I was doing that so you can see what I was reading. I told you I'm not very good at this. And beside that slide is a reproduction of an old postcard that shows you Mount Pisgah. And it's just a fixture that if you're looking south up through South Hominy, you've seen it all your life up through there. Stanza 2. Oh, look, I'm beginning to get the hang of this. Mr. Vanderbilt used to own it, or at least had a deed, as if a mere man, even a tycoon, could own such godly land. Built Buck Spring Lodge where blue blood guests killed deer and bear and buffalo and made their servants cook and serve it. I peeked in there as a young'un. You could set a T-model Ford in the fireplace and a bearskin rug looked fit to eat you alive. Did I say buffalo? Around here? Well, Papa told it how Mr. Vanderbilt ordered half a dozen, male and female, 3 of each from way out west, where he thought money cured all ills, even buffalo drought. I was at Hominy Station when them things come off the train. Big old wooden crates a snorting and a grunting and a growling like something inside itched to kill something outside. Us ragtag hooky boys and our teacher. Okay. I'm needing to read out of the book because part of my screen's covered up here. Us ragtag hooky boys and our teacher too dogged them horse-drawn carts all the way to a pen up Cutthroat Gap. First, they let out the buffalo gals, then after they settled down, busted out the he-beasts named after various Southern worthies. But if Daniel Boone and Verena Davis ever shared a lusty look of love, I never heard tell. I reckon the train ride or thin air one took the rut out of them. Soon the poor uprooted beasts starved or ran off or just plain petered out. Some things even a millionaire can't fix. And that's mostly a true story. I probably have embellished it a little bit, but Mr. Vanderbilt did bring in buffalo because he wanted his blue blood guests to be able to shoot something besides a deer every now and then. And it just didn't work. Now here is something about the nature on Pisgah. And this is another way you can focus. You can focus on place, you can focus on history, you can focus on nature. I was up Pisgah a fair amount, camped around a deadfall fire when I could sleep on the ground without being sucked into it. No poison oak past midway, clear water cold enough to crack your teeth. Air smells sharp as a fallen axe, red spruce and heat balsam, big as smokestacks. You'd see eagles, snakes big around as your arm. Papa said there was panthers, but I never heard one. Pisgah Springs had many a creek full of orange and black spring lizards and mouth-melting speckled trout, pure waters that birthed Davidson River and the East Fork of Pigeon and South Hominy Creek. I never have been more taken with the view, over a mile high, spy any direction and ask if Moses seen better when he looked from Gilead all the way to Zoar. I kind of doubt it myself. I like seeing chimney smoke from Candlertown and Etowah, Brevard and Waynesville, promised land for my people. And we got to go in. And that is kind of an echo of, I guess that's Milton, the Pisgah side of Palestine. Not that Posey, you see, read a lot of Milton, but I've read a lot of Milton, and sometimes those things can kind of creep in, and that's good too. Poetry, I think the richest poetry is allusive, and by that I mean that it refers to other poets and other poems and other stories. But then that's another thing. How about people? The community. Pisgah's north side overlooks a valley filled with kinfolk intermingled 200 years. Millers and Davises, Morgans and Israels, Owenbys and O'Kellys and Greens, proud and stubborn as Germans and Irish and Welshmen and Scots coiled like a clutch of winter snakes would be. Baptists and Methodists and Lutherans and Catholics and Jews and I don't know what all else. Back yonder, some of them helped runaway slaves and draft dodgers jumped the hollers for Tennessee and the road north. Not long after the war, Jephthah Miller named the boy Ulysses S., which takes a lot of sand or a chip on your shoulder, one. Old Jephthah wore out a stout Morgan girl, started 11 young'uns with her. His second wife's papa was Humphrey Posey Owenby, born when lots of boys got named after that old Baptist. Reckon my mother thought reviving it would give me good luck. Anyhow, South Homony's pretty country, settled by rugged people who didn't care a hang for any kind of government. Just wanted to be left alone at the mill or farm or store in the shadow of the mountain my father said was mother to us all. You probably, for full understanding of this, need to know that Humphrey Posey was a Baptist missionary in this part of the country. He was mostly known for his mission to the Cherokee Indians. And I'm not going to get into that because that brings in all kinds of colonialism and, you know, that kind of thing. But he did found several churches, Newfound Baptist in Buncombe County, Hominy Baptist in 1812 and out in the Candler community. On his way west out, he ended up in Georgia, I think North Georgia. And you'll find that in the late 19th century, there's a lot of people in the mountains that are named Posey, and that's the reason. I think we got one more here. Posey's been looking at this mountain for years. Mountain's all changed now. Got sold for one thing to the Forest Service. Then the parkway sliced across like a wounded snake. They tore down Buck Spring Lodge about that time too. They must have thought Yankee tourists would haul it off board by board, rock by rock, and they may have been right. They put a darn TV tower smack on top in 54, sticking up there blinking red of the night like a whorehouse sign just so we could watch Mr. Bill's magic bus. Between bad air in the 50s and 60s and them confounded bugs, you got to look hard for balsam or spruce pine now. And there's days you can't hardly see Cold Mountain, much less Asheville. I ain't been up in a while. When all you see is Floridians in flowery shirts, motorcycle men with ponytails, New Jerseys with yipper dogs, pouting kids listening to earphones, you don't go back. But down here, if you squint just right, and remember, the tower goes away, the rat still creeps, and you can almost hear an eagle scream before she dives. The Pisgah God meant for us to see. Tom, that's no offense to anybody from Florida. Um, It's just the way Posey thinks about people.
No offense taken.
Good.
No, just for North Carolina credentials, I went to Duke and I've spent a lot of time in that area of Carolina.
Okay. Okay.
So
Well, I went to Duke too, and I'll not hold that against you at all.
thank you. Since what do Duke people do since North Carolina people write poetry and state people learn how to work?
That's a good question. Duke people just probably become CEOs and get rich. I don't know. It's I don't know. My son has not held forth about that.
Yeah,
But a good part of his engineering career these days is working on the Duke campus.
Hmm.
So he's created some ponds there for their water supply and their chillers at the hospital and that sort of thing. So,
great.
okay, it's your turn.
I have a question.
Yes,
You mentioned
Kathleen.
earlier about the Moses reference and such, and I took that as being biblical.
Mhm.
I don't know the Milton references, but I would assume that, that's in the Bible, and so therefore Posey would be very familiar with it.
Well, you're right. There are lots of biblical references in Woodsmoke. Posey is the kind of guy who he used to go to church back when his wife made him.
Right.
And then after she died, he quit. He stayed home with his dog. His dog, by the way, is named Tomcat. And that'll tell you a little something about Posey. But he has absolutely no use for institutional church. But he's well schooled in the Bible, and he has definite opinions about that. So we may see a little bit more of that as we go on today. But and I don't really, again, I mentioned allusiveness in poetry. I think the more things like that you can bring in, even to a simple poem, the richer it is. It's like, I guess the image that comes to mind is transplanting plants and putting good rich soil where you're going into and all like that. You want to do that if you can. This is you've seen several ways that this old straight white guy can look at a place. Ask yourself what is important about the place that you want to talk about here. I hope I've triggered a memory or two, and I'm going to give you 5 or 6 minutes to scribble and see what you can come up with, and maybe we can sort of share with each other in a little bit. So try to come up with you're not going to come up with one as long as Pisgah, not in 5 minutes. But if you'll come up with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 lines that you're not ashamed to show to anybody else, then that's a real good start. So I'm going to give you 5 here. Start timing. Well, that's 5 minutes more or less. I've been over here scribbling about a specific object from my own youth, which is my mother had a marble slab that she kept on the kitchen cabinet. And she used it during the winter to make mint candy. And I don't know the physics and the, artistry behind that, but I remember helping her pull the mints as a kid. And she never would let me use the sharp scissors that she used to cut those things off with. But I remember that marble slab. And I've been trying to make a poem out of it, and I have fallen flat on my face trying to do that. I'll just have to admit to you. But I think that place, I remember the slab and the west facing window and the sun coming in on that marble slab. And I'm trying to do something with it. Maybe by the end of this session, it'll look like something. Anybody come up with anything they're even halfway proud of?
Sure.
Kathleen, go
Yeah.
for it.
Summit Road was just a slight hill, no mountain, but a ravine dropped out back to a stream, Breakneck Creek, named for its twists and turns, though mostly silted in when I knew it. Still, it flowed to the Cuyahoga, a native name for Crooked River. We had lots of turns in our lives. Then Lake Erie, always hoped the water went over Niagara Falls. Us kids all dreamed about that and going over in a wooden barrel. We'd never seen it, only little rills. And when we finally did get to New York and saw its height, we knew we couldn't survive.
I'm impressed. I'm serious. That's good.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'll give you a little secret. I worked for years in corporations writing things, and I was often given timed assignments like, you got 15 minutes to write that. You got half an hour to write that. And it's got to be good. It's got to be worth publishing.
Okay. Well, that's good experience.
Yeah, timed writing
sure.
helps.
Now, what I'm going to ask you to do in a little while is make that better.
Oh, I agree. That's just the start.
But anybody else? Tom, you're grinning down there. What you got?
Okay, let me give it a try. This is I'm a real amateur at this stuff, so
Not a problem.
riding down State Road 17 in Aunt Jean's 54 blue Buick, full of kids, full of noise, full of dirty feet all over the place. We were going to Papa's house or coming from it. In and out of town, Tater Hill Bluff they called it, until someone thought the Yankees were more likely to come to a place called Arcadia. But the warm, humid breeze still blows through hair on my head long gone. My God, why did the Hollingsworth paint their house that color rings out every time I pass that house, the same now faded color green. The echo of that ride rings out every time I ride through that town. That's all I got so far.
That's good. I would not hang my head at all about having written that.
I like the dirty feet and the house that you noted. I've known that house too. We had one where I grew up.
Yeah. And I like, the dirty feet struck me, and also the blue Buick. There's, Larry Brown, the late Larry Brown. I don't know if you know his work or not, but his son, who's also Larry Brown, these are Mississippi people, you have to understand, has a song called Blue Car. And it's, Tom, you might want to find that sometime. I
will.
It's a great song. I'm Blue Car. I don't think he names it a Buick. I'm pretty sure it's just a blue car, but it's a nice one.
Okay, thank you.
Mary Ellen, you got anything for us?
Well, I wrote about a different part of the country. I grew up in a country full of bayous, cypress kneed swamps, now taken over by oil companies. We kids could catch crawfish in local streams. Fed by the Bayou Tesh, so said the Bayou Tesh was once part of the Mississippi River, a roaming curve that got cut off from the main river and curled and twisted like a snake through South Louisiana. Hence the name Tesh, which some people say was an Indian word for snake.
I am so glad to hear you say that because I'm a big fan of James Lee Burke.
He and I
And-
went to college together. He was
Serious,
the editor of the school paper, and I was one of his reporters.
cool. Well, I did not know how to pronounce Bayou Tesh. I didn't know how to say that. Now I do. Thank
Well,
you.
that's the way you say it.
How does it look spelled?
Tech.
Thanks.
It's attributed to, I can't remember the tribe of Indians. And since you're using colloquial dialect, I said Indian, which is a little,
Mhm.
I wouldn't normally speak that way.
No. Well, we of a certain generation are learning how to say things again. And we need to do that. I remember growing up around here as a kid, you went to Cherokee to see the Indians. And I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's probably what my dad would have said about that. And they're standing around out there with Plains Indian Sioux headdresses on that the
Yeah.
Cherokee never had. And they're selling tomahawks that were made in Japan. The cultural thing was just terrible. And I have to point you now to my friend Annette Sonu Clapsaddle, who has just published a novel. Oh, and I shouldn't start in with these things if I'm not going to remember the title, but I think the title is Even As We Breathe. She is a card-carrying member of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee and one of their first accomplished novelists. And I've actually read the book. It's good. You ought to take a look at it.
Yeah, I read about it, but I haven't read the book.
Okay, well, it's worth a try.
Mhm.
I'm going to read a section, and Tom, you'll appreciate this. There's a little poem called Pole Creek in Woodsmoke, and it speaks to what you said. I've lived on this road all my life, Pole Creek Road, that is, till Uncle Ike's boy's wife took a notion Pole Creek Road didn't sound refined enough. So she planted her some dogwood trees and got the county or state or somebody to change it. Did everything get better? Well, Pole Creek still feeds Hominy Creek and run over polecats still stink to high heaven. So living on Dogwood Road changes nothing but my address. Wonder what hers is now after she let out for over the mountain. Gentrification of a
Yes.
sort, I suppose.
Yeah.
Who else? Stella, did you come up with anything?
I'll pass.
Okay. Anybody else? The soul of good writing is revision.
Yes.
I'm never satisfied with a poem until it has seen at least a dozen revisions, and I'm quite serious about that. Every word in a poem has to carry freight. There should be no unnecessary words. What it has to do is evoke, which means to call out something perhaps you had no idea was there, and almost certainly your reader didn't know about. And I'm saying reader and also substitute hearer, because if you're writing a poem and you don't get around eventually to saying it aloud to yourself, then you're going to stumble over stuff and it's not going to scan right and it's just not going to sound good. So always do the oral thing with it. My first revision usually involves what I call tightening. The analogy I use is tuning a banjo string. You tighten it till it sounds right, and you'll just kind of know when you get there. Oscar Wilde was famous for saying things that he either did or didn't say. but they were all witty. But he talks about revision. He says that one morning he spent all morning taking a comma out of a poem, and he spent all afternoon putting it back in. Okay, that's fine. He probably did that. But what I want you to do now is take 5 more minutes and whittle on this thing that you've got. See if you can knock out some words, see if you can make it sound a little better, and go for it like that. And I'm going to give you something, a little something extra to look at here while we're doing that. There's a house, in case any of you are writing about a house. 5 minutes.
I'll tell them coming in, all right?
Yeah, everything's turned off.
Oh, everything done?
Nope.
Okay, that's 5 minutes more or less. Is anybody proud of what you did in that time? Maybe you want to whittle on that a little bit more. I'm going to read you This House, which is the second poem in Woodsmoke, where we're narrowing the focus from the mountain and the neighborhood into one particular house. My father built this stout old place in 1914. We lived in a tar paper shack while he worked on it. Moving day was like coming to a castle. I was 8. I'm comfortable here yet. Next move, carry me out in a casket. Papa was a scrounger. Windows came from a church they raised down at Luther, and its front step became the granite mantel over our fireplace. Always was a comfortable house. It sighs and creaks like it has opinions. Me and Bertie remodeled in the 50s, put in pine paneling, central heat I'm too tight to use, a new bathroom. Only thing I regret is covering white clapboard with green asbestos shingles. Bertie wanted it to look modern. I'd take them off, but asbestos lung ain't a thing I'd care to die of. I love watching Bertie's flowers bloom. Tulips, yellow bells, japonica and lilacs, clematis and iris, snowballs and peony roses. I keep them up because of her. And besides, I'd almost soon raise tulips as taters. You can't eat flowers, but they sure dress up a table. Masterest thing about this fine old place, from the front porch, you spy Mount Pisgah and don't see a neighbor in any direction. Knock on wood, Lord willing, it'll stay that way. And of course, like life, it did not stay that way for Posey, but he finally reconciles himself to having a neighbor. Anybody want to read what they've written?
Sure, I'm always game.
Go for it.
Just a slight hill, Summit Road, was misnamed, but our piece dropped back to Breakneck Creek, mostly silted in when I knew it. We dropped sticks in from the bridge, hoped they'd get to the Cuyahoga, Crooked River by the natives, then Lake Erie, and maybe over Niagara Falls. We kids dreamed of that, roll ourselves in a wooden barrel. Of course, we'd never seen it, only knew the little rills nearby. The twists of rivers and creeks were minor, although we had plenty of them. But when we finally got to New York, saw that storm of water thunder into Lake Ontario, we knew we couldn't survive.
Okay, tell us what you did with that.
Well, I changed the beginning a bit. It started, Summit Road was just a slight hill. So instead I wanted to start with the description, maybe just a slight hill, Summit Road. So you would get that sense of what it was named was not what it really was. But I wanted the sense that there was a drop, and the drop was to Breakneck Creek in the back. So you had the sense of summit, but not summit because of the hill, but because of the creek.
And tell me, did you have Breakneck Creek in the original?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's a great place name.
It is a great place name. It is a great place name. And I added about dropping sticks in from the bridge because that's how things floated. You know, we all, and it did make that, if something went from where our little creek, it went to the Cuyahoga River and then on to Lake Erie and then to Niagara Falls. So I want to get that sense. I don't think I'm really getting that yet. I think I've got the names too bunched together at this point. But the whole idea was that the reason we wanted the stick to go from our little stream and under the bridge was that whole idea of if it got to Niagara Falls, that was just, you know, we'd seen pictures, but we'd never been there. And that was the exciting thing. That was the Disney of our world.
Thank you for that. Mary Ellen, did you improve yours?
I'm unmuting here. I had to add a little to mine, which I did instead of revising. The people who settled this part of the country are called Cajuns. For for the most part, they still live there. My grandma's house was not far from the bayou. It was a rambling gray house on Fulton Street. Fulton backed onto Jane, and Jane ran right beside the bayou. The church people would come and baptize the saved right in the crook of the road. And that's as far as I got. So I haven't really got to the revising. I needed to give it a little bit more personal perspective before I could revise.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds perfectly good as far as technique and things like that go. And, you know, there's no one way to do this. There's tons and tons and tons of ways to do this stuff. And I think you're on the right track with what you're doing. I like it. Tom, did you do anything with yours?
Tom experienced a slight emergency and had to leave us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I didn't do one last time, but because I felt like it was cheating, because it was already written before we got here. But I'll share one that's been revised that I've done before because it fits the theme.
That'll work, Catherine. Go ahead.
There he went, just cruising on down around Beecham's curve, holding on to his hat. And there I stood, just looking at him like I didn't have a lick of sense. That fella from the fireside chats, the one who started that CCC. Mostly, I remember his white pinstripe suit. He rode in the back of a slick black Cadillac. That's where Buck went to work for that CCC, to build the parkway, to lure in the tourists. They really carved out some rock in the name of getting folks in and out of here. They started building roads all over the place. Out by Bryson City, they even built a road to nowhere.
I like that.
Great.
For those of us who are maybe not all that familiar with the time frame here, what years are you talking about here, Catherine?
This is specifically 1939. This is based on an oral history interview with my grandfather.
Okay. And because I knew FDR was through here in 40 when he dedicated the park. I think that was in September of 1940. I did not know he came through here, before that, but I'm not surprised.
I think that one was with little fanfare, from what I understand from him, but he could also have his dates mixed up. So this very well could be September 1940.
Okay, well, I know that my wife's mother was born on Pole Creek in Candler. And she and the place where she lived was very close to where Posy lives. As a matter of fact, forget it, it's the same place. But I know that she remembered as a little girl, she was born in 1925. And as a little girl, they all walked down to what became 1923 a little later to see Roosevelt coming through with his motorcade. And I don't know what year that would have been, but that was an indelible memory that she had growing up. My folks didn't live close to 1923, and I don't know whether Mary's folks had a picture of FDR in their kitchen or not. My folks didn't, but I did know people who did. Here's FDR. And here's the chimney, and here's Jesus. That's just the way some of these folks thought about the CCC and the roads and this, that, and the other. They didn't think about tourists coming in here so much as here's a job, And anyway, I digress. But isn't that what poetry is about a lot? Digression. I want to read another poem or two, and I'm going to give you a little bit more time to work on these or to ask some questions. I think that that's kind of important in a setting like this too. Let's see here what I got. Let's try burying ground. It's mighty quiet on the side of the hill. A pretty place too to lay down facing east against that trumpet blast they talk about in the Revelations. I get up here every now and then to tidy up, tend to plants, say howdy to Birdie. Sometimes, like today, I just set a spell and think. People don't hardly have family burying grounds anymore. It's a shame, for there you see where you come from, as well as where you're bound. Dust to dust, the book says. Birdie's people started planting here when her great-grandpa died. That's him yonder with the gates of heaven opening up atop his marble column. What I hear, he likely busted other gates wide open, but that's not mine to judge. There's all kinds of tomb rocks, from store-bought stones with gone but not forgotten, to square rectangles with hand-chiseled names and dates, but no room or maybe patience for words of remembrance. Moss and lichen-covered field stones under which lie stillbirths and babies lived a day or two. Birdie and me had one of them. She called her Sarah, but the young'un never even cried. She's buried way over yonder where it's as quiet as she was, so she can listen to the birds in peace. And she's got the best view of Pisgah a gal could want. I planted that butterfly bush next to Birdie because she loved them. And I put in that lilac close to Sarah. Birdie, bless her, planted March flowers on our girl's grave. So early spring, I come up here for yellow comfort. I thin and replant every few years. Birdie's circled by the children of Sarah's first flowers. She'd like that. One of these days, they'll lay me down beside her forever to sleep. By then, I'm sure, I'll need the rest. There's something about a cemetery that makes folks think. At least most folks that I know. And that poem is kind of in a tradition. You think of maybe English poems like Gray's Elegy. They always said written in a country churchyard, but actually it was Gray's Elegy wrote in a country churchyard when he wrote it. And somebody cleaned up his grammar a little bit after that. Or thinking about Robert Lowell's Quaker Graveyard in Nantucket, to take a northern example on that. And if you don't know my friend Jesse Graves' poetry, you should. Jesse teaches over at East Tennessee State University. He's their poet in residence. And he is as good a poet of place as any I've ever read. So go find that, Jesse Graves. And for a fellow named Graves to write about a graveyard is somehow appropriate, I think. There's a poem called Johnson's Ground, and I'm going to read you just a verse or two of it so you can get kind of the feel. Johnson's Ground is the Johnson family cemetery, the burying ground, and they have a reunion every Memorial Day, which they call Decoration Day, and they come up and they, tidy up the place, mow and whatever, put out new flowers and whatever they need to do. And they talk. My great uncle Gene tells my father and me about the base he served in Korea, how bombs sounded hitting the village, while 100 feet away from us is my cousin Gary, killed in Vietnam, telling his story into our other ears, into the soles of our shoes. I offer my hands one more time to the company who packs their leftovers and drives away, and to the company who stays behind under the tall grass, left in the restless turning of what we remember of them. Jesse's worth reading. Let's see here. Green Wood is a short poem. And this is one of the examples of how you should keep a journal and never throw anything away. I heat wood, and I still do my own firewood and all that kind of thing. And I got to thinking about Greenwood one day, or one night actually, and I put this in my journal. And I don't know, came up with this at some point. The smell of a stack of green wood has weight relative to the heat it gives when dry. The odor lingers, lays a hand on your shoulder like an old friend you ain't seen in months. There is smell as place, if you will. Not quite a haiku, has too many syllables, but you see where I'm going with that. By the way, I was an white Appalachian kid back in the 60s. And what was I writing? Haiku. Go figure. I don't know. Anybody want to do some more reading? Anybody have any questions? I'm going to read poems to you if you don't have any questions.
I have a question, Wayne.
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about where Posey came from? Did he just come to you as a person that you were like, I just know this person? Or was it rooted in some of your other work? Did he come to you as you were working on your novels?
He had very little to do with my other work. I will say that. And I think walking into my head is as good a metaphor as I can use for how he came to me. I got to know him simply by doing a few things like this Greenwood thing, and there's several poems in here that have to do with firewood, and I don't know, I just kind of fleshed him out like I do with my fictional characters in prose, and realized that this might be kind of fun to do this in verse. It really didn't occur to me to do this in prose.
I haven't gotten through the whole thing yet, but as I started it, it made me think about the first chapter of Wilma Dykeman's The French Broad, and how it's almost in a second person kind of narration, and the man who is the narrator that's telling you, the reader, all about the river in that first chapter. I don't know, I kind of imagine him as being Posey Green, because he's a nameless character in that book. But as I've started reading through this, it just made me think about that first chapter of The French Broad.
Well, that's a high compliment. Thank you, Catherine. I take a little bit of pride in the fact that Wilma was the first recipient of the Thomas Wolfe Literary Award from the Western North Carolina Historical Association. And I won that award in 2010 for my second novel. So there is a little bit of a connection between me and Wilma, and I'm very proud of that. And I'm glad you brought that question up, because these things, if you've got time, these things evolve. I'm gonna come up, yeah. This poem, Woodsmoke, is in the voice of Posey's neighbor, Susan. I wrote this poem in, let's see, somewhere around 2010. And I had no idea who was writing it or even really why, but this was published in a journal called Appalachian Heritage in 2011. And I didn't have Posey in this poem at all, but when I started thinking about Posey, I thought, damn, that's right. That's where this is Susan's poem. And it came kind of like this. Down the hill, morning smoke graces Posey's chimney and quietly decrees another day has triumphed over sleep and death. Used to see it in the gray of dawn, but now it comes as late as 7. It gnaws at me. Sometimes I gaze out the window and pray the smoke into being. It creeps on the roof line if rain or snow. He's low, better than red sky to hail the weather. Some morning late, I'll see no smoke. Put my shawl around my shoulders and slowly walk down the hill to find him sick or gone. Not this morning, thank you, Lord. I didn't know that was Susan's voice. I didn't know. As you can see, this is a little bit more refined than Posey's voice, and it's obviously feminine because guys don't wear shawls. But I had to stick Posey in it to bring it up to date in from the original version. So I guess my
The
point here
question is, where did Susan come from in your, your conceptualization of this book?
I don't have a particular place for Susan to come from, except very close to probably Asheville. I don't have her fleshed out quite as much as I have Posey. What I can tell you about Susan is that she's in her mid-50s. She was in what she thought was a good marriage until her husband ran off with a quite younger number who drove a BMW Roadster and just left her. And the reason she's close to Posey is she kind of got financially well over this divorce, and she had enough money to buy the land that was next to Posey's house. So, and I don't remember now whether I even named her ex-husband, but that's about all I can tell you about Susan, except she is a poet and she does like to experiment. There's even a sonnet in here that she wrote. And there's an experimental poem in here about a tick. Now, why anybody would write a poem about a tick, says Posey, I will never know, but she did. And I think his phrase for it in there is a dad burn tick. But that's about all I can give you for Susan. I don't know if there's going to be a sequel to this or not.
I was just going to ask, are you planning to write other poetry, maybe not in Posey's voice?
Well, I have done some of that, and maybe I'll read you one of those here in a few minutes. I have been listening to Posey a little bit since Woodsmoke has been published, and he has given me 3 or 4 more poems. Not near enough critical mass to think about calling up the folks at Blair and saying, hey, I've got some more stuff for you. And even though Blair is a nonprofit publisher, they know good and well that what Guy Clark said in a song years ago is true. There ain't no money in poetry. So I don't know whether this will be continued or not, but yeah, it's I keep writing poems. I like it. This is a very personal poem, but I'll share it with you anyway. A couple of years ago, I was diagnosed with lung cancer. And fortunately, it was the kind that was encapsulated, and they did a lobectomy and they got it all, and no chemo and all of that. I'm fine. Praise Jesus. But this poem is called Just Dear, and it's one I mentioned early on, coping with grief. Well, there's a lot of grief that slaps you in the face when your doctor looks at you and says, this is cancer. And anyway, the morning I learned I had cancer, 7 deer browsed the woods around the house. I saw their breath in the cold sunlight. I saw one piss in the leaves. I saw their round doe eyes, wary and dark, and thought them to be a good omen. Then I went to the doctor. They were only deer, doing deer things. Who was I that all nature should bend to the arc of my disease? Just deer, that's all. Still, I invite their beauty back any time. That will help with healing. And I wrote that the morning after I got back from the doctor, after I'd had a good cry. And I don't know if it's any good or not, but it sure helped me out. But enough of that. Any other questions?
Well, a comment, actually, I was really enjoying in a lot of these phrases you used. In the first one, I noted crowback miles. And that was true in that house poem too. You had a lot of really wonderful ways you were using language that I really admire.
Well, crowback, I was kind of proud of that too. Of course, there's the cliche, as the crow flies, and I didn't want to say it that way. And I think I was hoping I could convey that same thing in a new way.
I think you did.
Thank you.
I have another one, Wayne.
Okay.
So I think, one of the things that can be pretty difficult about writing Appalachian characters is writing their voice without going too far. And when I do some of this myself, I find it helpful to channel specific people. And one of those people is the preacher I grew up with, because while he is very expressive and uses a lot of sayings and cliches and things, being able to think about that person's specific voice keeps me grounded and accidentally going over the line for like, oh, this is a hillbilly cartoon now. So is there, do you just find it very natural and easy to be able to keep from making these people too caricatured in their voice? Or is that something that you have to sort of work on and go back and read it 3 days later and say, oh, that's kind of
you're walking a
too much.
tightrope when you're talking about stereotypes, and that's right. I don't have a whole lot of trouble with that, simply because, and sort of the same thing you're talking about, Catherine. My wife's great uncle was a storyteller. He spoke Haywood County, if you follow me on that, better than anybody I've ever known. And he was, well, I used to work at a furniture store, and he would come to work with me every Saturday. And he would sit around in the office and he would talk for 8 hours. And I listened to a lot of that. And he is sort of my voice of people like Posey. Okay. He could turn a phrase. He really could. But yeah, you're right. The stereotype. There's a prose poem in Woodsmoke called Snuffy Smith that speaks to the stereotype business in there. And come to think of it, I'm gonna read you one more short poem that talks about that stereotype. Let's see if I can find it right quick. It's called Treewood. There it is. I didn't ask him to print this one because I didn't think it would come up, but I think it's germane to what we're talking about. One of the Appalachian stereotypes is something that the scholars call pleonasm. If you can say something in one word, why not say it in two? And if you can say it in three, you're doing even better. So this is a poem about that. My son, he used to say his grandpa talked like a hillbilly, which of course he was. I can hear my daddy yet praising his rifle gun, reading his Bible book, wanting to eat him some ham meat. Such talk never shamed me a bit, but I've got away from it. Oh, I speak of tree wood, but that just means bark on, not split firewood. I spec limb wood's more to the point, but I think a body knows what I mean. I don't worry about sounding like a hick, and anyhow, I'm a mite hungry for a can of tuna fish. always kind of bothered me, tuna fish. We had, my editor at Blair and I had a conversation one afternoon about, do I keep the G's that Posey drops? I can hear my daddy talking. And my original version of that in print dropped the G. And she said, and I think with wisdom, don't. When you're reading it, when you're reading it not aloud, it'll just be irritating if you do that for the apostrophe instead of the G. I think she was probably right. But yeah, you need to be careful about that kind of thing. It's real easy to make a mountain character sound like the Beverly Hillbillies. That's real easy. I don't think that the folks who wrote that program were out of work English majors at all. I don't think they had too much trouble with that. Other questions? We're about done here as far as time, but I've got all afternoon if you want to hang around.
Do you have a copy of Snuffy Smith
Yes.
there? I'm wondering if you would read that before we go.
I think that'll be a great way to wrap us up, Wayne.
Okay. This is called Snuffy Smith. I never minded much being called a hillbilly, but you best smile when you say it because we've gotten a bad name. Snuffy Smith ain't fitting stuff for the funny papers. Most times it ain't funny, and besides, there ain't a lot of truth to it. Hoot and holler men nap days and steal hens nights while women gossip, hew wood, and draw water. They'd work themselves into early graves, except nobody much dies in the comics. Neither do worn out notions like mountain men are bone idle drunks who keep women in their rightful place. I know little Abner was much the same, but it was funny. And Daisy May, she was something else. Besides, Dogpatch died with its author. We'd have been better off if Hoot and Holler had too. Off the soapbox, it's time for dinner.
Great. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
folks. Thank
Yeah,
you for
it's been a
being
great
here.
class.
Yeah, it's
Thanks.
been really nice.
I've
Yeah,
enjoyed it.
absolutely. So thank you, Wayne, again. And for those of you who have not gotten a hold of the book yet and are interested in the other novel that Wayne mentioned, Even As We Breathe, I added links to both Woodsmoke and Even As We Breathe in the chat here. That's just the NC Cardinal catalog. So if you do have your Buncombe County or other surrounding NC Cardinal library cards like Henderson and Madison and Transylvania County, you can place those items on hold and pick them up at whichever library is most convenient for you. And again, just a reminder that this is put on by the Buncombe County Special Collections Library, which is located at 67 Haywood Street in downtown Asheville. And we're now open to walk-ins. So if you are continuing to work on your poems of place and you're looking for a word name and place name inspiration, certainly come on down. We're not just for old dusty documents. We have plenty of research help that has nothing to do with the past. So, and if you have any questions for Wayne, Wayne, is there a best way to get a hold of you after this event?
Yeah, there's email is fine. If you want to interact, that's fine. My email address is owlhead, OWLHEAD 38 @gmail.com.
All right. And to get a hold of us, if you have any questions about Buncombe County Special Collections, you can send us an email at packnc@buncombecounty.org. And thanks again, y'all, for being here. We'll put this up on YouTube later this week. So thanks a lot. Have a great afternoon.
Thank
you,
you. This
Catherine.
was really wonderful.
Thanks. Yes, thank you both.
Have a
Yes.
great evening.
Mhm.
Really
Y'all
enjoyed.
too.
Thank you.